Warning, spoilers are inbound in this video for the original Final Fantasy VII, the entire compilation of Final Fantasy VII, and the entire Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy. Additionally, to make sure you don't get lost and get the most out of this episode of Under the Plate, I highly recommend that you watch our prior 3 videos. Episode 1, The Lifestream, Final Fantasy VII's Eternal Stream of Knowledge. Episode 2, The Truth Surrounding Aerith's Fate in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And Episode 3, Breaking Through Reality, Understanding Worlds in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. With these 3 videos, you'll be able to understand all of the concepts we're going to talk about today in much grander detail, so I highly encourage you to watch those before watching this video. With that being said, welcome to episode 16 of Under the Plate. Let's get started. Final Fantasy VII is one of the most important and beloved games of all time. Following the release of Final Fantasy VII, multiple spin-offs, prequels, and sequels were released. Final Fantasy VII evolved beyond a single game. It was now a series. Even from the beginning, Final Fantasy VII was Square's best-selling game ever. Today, only Final Fantasy XIV sits higher in copies sold, a testament to both the staying power and popularity of this iconic genre-defying title. As the years passed after 1997, fan demand only grew for a remake of the original game. We retreated to the famous PlayStation 3 tech demo, which recreated the game's iconic opening sequence, and even the infamous Final Fantasy VII announcement for PS4 in 2014. But everything changed at E3 2015. Final Fantasy VII Remake was real. Though it would take 5 years to release, Final Fantasy VII Remake shocked the world and redefined what a remake could be when it was released on April 10th, 2020. Prior to Remake, the general consensus of a video game remake was a game that perfectly recreated the original with improvements and changes only where necessary to improve the overall experience. Right from the get-go, Rebirth threw those expectations out the window. First, it was made clear at its initial reveal that Final Fantasy VII Remake was planned to be a multi-part series. Square Enix was planning to release multiple remade games based on one 1997 PlayStation 1 classic, which is something no one else had really attempted in the video game industry. Square simply believed that recreating the density felt in the original game was not possible with one singular PlayStation 4 title. Speaking with Dengeki Online, Nomura said the following after its reveal: "If we dedicated our time to a single release, parts of it would become condensed. We'd have to cut some parts, and additional parts would come in few. So rather than remake the game as a full volume, we decided to do multiple parts." While the number of titles in the project was undecided at the time, the notion of this being multiple games was clear in 2015. The team spent the time while developing Remake and Rebirth determining where the game would end, with Nojima at one point wishing to end Rebirth with Tifa falling into the Mako reactor in Gongaga. Nomura shared in 2022 that while he originally planned a trilogy, Kitase wished to look at the possibility of a 2-part series, but it was deemed too difficult since Remake only covered Midgar. And during the same interview, Nomura even confirmed that the team was locked into 3 parts, no more, no less. Right away, there were no plans to create more than 3 games, he said. Since Final Fantasy VII Remake only led up to leaving Midgar, it is difficult to incorporate the original content in the remaining 2 parts, so some people may be worried that something may be omitted. Rest assured that the remaining volume will not merely be a digest of the original. It's no secret that for fans of the iconic RPG, the Final Fantasy VII Remake project has been a dream come true. Instead of just getting one game, we're getting three, allowing for the Final Fantasy VII celebration to last for over a decade instead of just a few years. And beyond that, these remakes provided more than anyone could have hoped for. Final Fantasy VII has never been bigger or talked about more. Here in 2025, we've seen the release of both the first and second installments, Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. As the developers shared, these titles have refined and reimagined numerous aspects of the Final Fantasy VII story. Instead of just a visual upgrade, Square wished to blow past any and all expectations and standards for what players expected out of a remake. After the game's blowout info reveal during E3 2019, Yoshinori Kitase shared the following message. For the original core members of the development team, simply recreating the original game with improved graphics wasn't enough to get us invested and excited about remaking 7. To return, we want to go beyond the original, telling a deeper story and providing a modern gaming experience. We really want to go above and beyond what is expected of a remake. With this philosophy guiding development, it was inevitable that the Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy would go beyond a simple one-to-one retelling of the original story. Many new changes and additions have already occurred, naturally leading to endless discussion and theorization online, with the third and final act looming on the horizon. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth especially changed arguably the most iconic moment of the original game, Aerith's fate, or did it? Today, just after the 28th anniversary of Final Fantasy VII, I'm here to present why I believe the Final Fantasy VII Remake project is so genius. Despite the crazy theories and panic seen online from many fans after playing through the first two titles, I'm confident in saying that the Final Fantasy VII Remake project has always and will continue to tell the same story. This is something I believed would hold true since the beginning, and Rebirth only reaffirmed it. If you're expecting a massive departure for Part 3, you either haven't been paying close attention or are holding on to the unknown journey a little too closely. You might be ready to rush into the comments and tell me I'm crazy, insane, or everything in between, but I encourage you to bear with me. I want to promote thinking and discussion, as I do with every video I create with Under the Plate. Open your eyes and enter a fresh perspective. Maybe, just maybe, this entire story has been perfectly crafted and engineered to make you think it's different, even though it's not. The story of the remake project has been discussed almost endlessly by Kitase, Nomura, and Hamaguchi, and the path the remake project will take has been laid out in crystal clear writing since the beginning. Today, I want to walk you through why I'm confident Part 3 will continue to follow the iconic storyline, and why everything in the remake project, even as crazy as it may seem at sometimes, is connected to the heart of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII and its many themes. From the start, Final Fantasy VII Remake was never about rewriting the story. It was about bringing all of Final Fantasy VII into a single, unified vision, creating the ultimate version of Final Fantasy VII. This meant incorporating not only the original game, but also elements from Advent Children, Crisis Core, and the entire compilation. Instead of existing as separate entities, these stories are now being woven together into one definitive version of Final Fantasy VII. This was never a sequel. This was never a new story. This is Final Fantasy VII, the way it was always meant to be experienced. So, why would Square introduce the Whispers, multiple worlds, and seemingly convoluted additions if the story was always going to end the same way? To many, these elements feel unnecessary, almost as if they exist solely to rewrite Final Fantasy VII into something entirely new. This can even feel like a betrayal to the original story and to longtime fans who requested a remake for years. But what if these elements were never about changing the story at all? What if they were always meant to expand it? The answer lies within the heart of this project. These are mere expansions of what was offered in the original game, not changes meant to make a new story. For Square, Final Fantasy VII is like a sacred religious book. You can think of it like the Bible. If you were to ever remake such an artifact, you wouldn't want to change it in any way. This is Square Enix's most beloved story of all time, and Final Fantasy VII Remake is the definitive version for modern audiences. Like any text restoration, the Remake Trilogy is about preserving the essence while deepening the experience with knowledge of the present. This right here is exactly why the Shackles of Fate were introduced and ultimately broken in the end. Final Fantasy VII did not remain frozen in time after 1997. Over the years, Square Enix expanded its universe with the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, adding new characters, backstory, and clarifying mysteries left ambiguous in the original game. Was humanity truly wiped out? What became of certain characters? The compilation of Final Fantasy VII provided these answers, but a true one-to-one remake would not have been able to integrate these additions naturally. By breaking free from the strict structure of the original game, the remake project allows all of Final Fantasy VII, including its expanded lore, to exist as one complete narrative. Where players once debated ambiguous elements, Square has created the most definitive version of Final Fantasy VII ever told, taking everything into account, and then some. A true remake of Final Fantasy VII would not have allowed the developers to include such lore that was not in the original game. It would have been restrictive, essentially locking the story into a one-to-one retelling of the 1997 original. But by opening up an unknown journey, the team has opened a door of possibilities, unlocking a flexible framework in which to tell this story. The development team has managed to seamlessly integrate various scenes, characters, and lore that were not in the universe until the compilation existed. We've already encountered Kyrie and Leslie from Final Fantasy VII The Kids Are Alright, a Turk's side story, and plenty more characters many Final Fantasy VII fans might have never had exposure to before Remake since they did not appear in the original game. And of course, many new scenes have been added too, with the purpose of enhancing the story and driving it further home with the game's many themes. Without being freed from the shackles of fate, we never would have gotten the entirety of Chapter 9 in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which was my favorite of the whole game. This was a key chapter that filled what many could call a gap in the world of the original Final Fantasy VII, giving an area that had minimal purpose a major breath of new life. Not only does it expand on an area that was lacking in the original, bringing in characters and elements from compilation titles like Crisis Core, but it also could even set up a major story explanation in Part 3, resolving one of the original game's many mysteries left for interpretation. In the original Final Fantasy VII, Sapphire Weapon attacks Junon and specifically targets the room where Shinra is attempting to kill Tifa with poison. The powerful beam ends up creating a hole in the room which saves Tifa's life. But why was this? How did it know? Sure, it could just be the planet, or maybe a coincidence, but isn't that a little unclear? If you notice, this weapon that swallows Tifa in Chapter 9 and returns her in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth suspiciously has hints of blue on it. Could this possibly be the Sapphire weapon before awakening in response to Sephiroth? Things like this I can only speculate on, but when you think about it, this answers the questions left from the original about why the weapon saved Tifa, removing player interpretation from the table. In essence, it folds yet another piece of the story into the remake's expanded narrative. And truthfully, that brings up the question. If the story remains intact, what fate are we defying? What exactly did we break free from? The concept of defying fate is nothing new to Final Fantasy VII, acting as a theme present within the original 1997 game. For the entirety of the original game, Cloud is fighting his fate of being a puppet of both Sephiroth and Jenova. Eventually, he defies it, breaking free and fixing his fractured mind in the livestream with Tifa. Even at the end of the game, where everything seems helpless and the fate of humanity looks to be doomed, fate is defied as the livestream rises up to join Holy in stopping Meteor from destroying the planet. But this time, things are different, or at least they appear to be. For the Final Fantasy VII Remake project, the fate we are defying might be something not so obvious from the original game. To truly understand where Part 3 is headed, we need to look back at how Final Fantasy VII originally ended. The conclusion of the 1997 game set the foundation for everything that followed, and by revisiting it, we can better grasp how the Remake Trilogy is approaching its finale. In the midst of Disc 2, the party reunites with Bugenhagen after the failed attempt to destroy the meteor with the Shinra number 26. In a return trip to Cosmo Canyon to seek out his wisdom, Bugenhagen encourages the party to reach into the deepest parts of their hearts and seek something forgotten. Cloud brings up Aerith, saying to the party that she has been here all along, right by their side. As he brings this to light, the entire party agrees, with Red 13 questioning if it is impossible to carry on Aerith's attempt to stop the meteor now that she is gone. Following a remark from Cid, they realize that Aerith went to the City of the Ancients for a reason, so there must be something there. Joined by Bugenhagen, the party makes its way to the once prosperous city. Inside the City of the Ancients, Bugenhagen reveals that the knowledge of the Ancients swirling in the air revealed to him that the planet is in a crisis beyond human power, and when the time comes, we must search for Holy, the ultimate white magic, something that might stand against Meteor and perhaps be the planet's last hope. In order for Holy to appear, a soul seeking it must reach the planet. Upon its use, Meteor, weapon, and everything will disappear, perhaps even humanity. It is the planet's decision to make. All that is bad will disappear, nothing more, nothing less. Bugenhagen proposes the question to Cloud. I wonder which we humans are. To find Holy, one must speak with the planet. To bond the planet to humans, the white materia must be obtained. If the wish reaches the planet, the white materia will glow a pale green. Cloud then realizes there is nothing they can do, as Aerith had the white materia, and it fell from the altar after she died. Upon solving a riddle left behind and hearing a couple hoo-hoo-hoos later, the key to the Ancients is found, which Bugenhagen slots into the music-making device that causes a waterfall to appear over the ancient structure. Upon walking inside, an image was projected onto the water, revealing that Holy reached the bottom of the altar and was glowing a faint green. Aerith managed to reach the planet with her prayers. Cloud reveals that Aerith appeared in his dreams, an interesting revelation if I do say so myself, recalling that she told him she was the only one who could stop Sephiroth, and it had to be here. Even with Holy activated, it's not moving. Something has gotten in its way, or rather, someone. Sephiroth. Holy was able to be cast by Aerith. It did work. However, the planet cannot be saved with Holy unleashed until Sephiroth is stopped. This ultimately comes to fruition at the bottom of the northern cave, with time ticking more than ever as Meteor's impending arrival looms in the sky. As the party descends inside the planet, they come face to face with Holy, now massive in size. But as Bugenhagen theorized, the materia cannot act due to Sephiroth standing before it and preventing it from unleashing. Thus begins the iconic final boss of Final Fantasy VII, and upon Sephiroth's defeat, Cloud's mind leaves his body to face Sephiroth within the lifestream. Here, he performs the Omni Slash to defeat Sephiroth once and for all. As he watches Sephiroth's body explode into light, Cloud stands in a black space where a light suddenly appears beneath him, lifestream particles emitting from his feet. As Cloud looks above, a hand reaches out to him, with Aerith returning him to his body just before the cave can crumble. Together with Tifa and the rest of the party, the group boards the Highwind and takes off out of the cave just as the power of Holy is unleashed on the planet. Unfortunately, despite the defeat of Sephiroth and freeing of Holy, it's too late. Meteor has arrived and has begun destroying Midgar, casting whirlwind tornadoes of fire that destroy plate after plate of the Mako metropolis. Holy manages to neutralize the whirlwinds, but it's not enough. Meteor's descent continues, with a chance for survival looking hopeless. Holy was unleashed too late. It didn't matter that they stopped Sephiroth and let it free. Just as reality sets in for the party in the Highwind, Tifa notices a spark of lifestream emerge from the ground, rising into the air. Another joins, and then another. All over the planet, lifestream rises, making its way toward the meteor. Around the entire globe, the lifestream joins together with Holy pushing the meteor away from the planet. As the pushback continues, with Holy preparing to destroy the meteor, a familiar chime plays, with Aerith appearing, looking up at the player one last time. She managed to command the lifestream from within it to save the planet, protecting the world from destruction as she promised. 500 years later, we see a short scene beneath the clouds where Red 13 and his children run alongside cliffs. Upon reaching the top, we see Midgar, now overgrown and brimming with life, filled with mosses, trees, and animals. As the Final Fantasy VII logo is displayed for one final time, we hear the laughter of children in the background, filled with joy and cheerfulness. Up until Final Fantasy VII, the Final Fantasy series wasn't known for ambiguous, open-ended stories. The first 6 titles offered complete stories that left the players with answers on how the ending played out. There wasn't really room for interpretation. However, the release of Final Fantasy VII offered an ending that was unlike anything the series had done before. Square left a game's ending open to player interpretation for the first time in the Final Fantasy series. The game never explicitly confirms what happened in the immediate aftermath of the lifestream swirling to stop the meteor, making its ending one of the boldest in gaming history. In 1997, the compilation of Final Fantasy VII or plans for any spin-offs, prequels, or sequels didn't exist. Final Fantasy VII was Final Fantasy VII, and that meant the ambiguous nature of its ending left the truth of what happened up to player interpretation. Mainline Final Fantasy titles never received any spin-offs or sequels until 2003 with Final Fantasy X-2. This was a critical time for Square, as it was facing what many considered a financial crisis after the poor reception and sales of Hironobu Sakaguchi's Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. After Final Fantasy X was delayed, things were in the red, but the game ended up being a huge success, leading to Final Fantasy X-2, which turned out to be a surprise financial hit for Square. This kicked off a change in strategy for Final Fantasy, where the series brought more frequent releases with different sub-series and spin-offs. One of the first ones announced after X-2 was the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, announced at Tokyo Game Show 2003. As you likely know, this collection of projects brought both prequels and sequels, with the key pieces being Advent Children, Dirge of Cerberus, and Crisis Core. With each release, more and more answers were revealed from the original game, expanding on what was possible on the PlayStation 1 and clarifying very key elements like the ending. In 1997, it was really anyone's guess as to whether or not humanity survived at the very end of the game, as Bugenhagen proposed to Cloud in Disc 2. Upon its use, meteor, weapon, and everything will disappear, perhaps even humanity. It is the planet's decision to make. All that is bad will disappear, nothing more. I wonder which we humans are. Was humanity deemed bad by Holy and the planet, or was it granted another chance? Each player who finished Final Fantasy VII came away with a different interpretation in 1997. However, the compilation changed everything, providing answers that players questioned for years. We learned that humanity survived the meteor, being saved by the planet to live another day. The beloved cast hadn't forgotten Aerith's sacrifice, still carrying on her memory and will with a pink bow memento on each of their clothes. We even saw a great expansion of characters like Zack, who only appeared for a small bit in the original, yet played a key role in the story. Whether you realize it or not, fans all came away with different opinions of the game for years. Some fans believed that humanity was purged from the planet, leaving Midgar to be overgrown and be reclaimed by nature, and the laughs of children left to exist in the livestream. Others felt that humanity survived. The planet gave humanity another chance, and at the end of the game, humanity left Midgar alone to be reclaimed by nature, no longer deriving the planet of Mako. Even Yoshinori Kitase and Kazushige Nojima offered different takes on the ending of the original game. In 2003, Nojima said, "The ending of Final Fantasy VII is pretty straightforward. The planet is still alive thanks to Cloud and his party, and smoke can be seen rising from Midgar, indicating humanity survived. However, Naora reveals he actually forgot to add the smoke into the FMV. This is in stark contrast to a comment from Yoshinori Kitase in 2005, where he shared his view of the iconic ending. In a way, I consider that epilogue to be the true happy ending of Final Fantasy VII. Well, it's a happy ending even though all the human beings are destroyed. For me, I look back today in love with the original ending, as I feel it wrapped up the thematic elements of the narrative beautifully. Personally, I saw the ending as nature and the planet itself reclaiming what was once its own. Others might not have, and that's the beauty of it. Final Fantasy VII explores life, death, the cycle of it all, and many more themes, and this ending asks players to reflect on what that all means. This was a purposeful narrative decision that drove the game home for many, despite being left up to interpretation. From 1997 to 2003, this is what we were left with. No answers in new games, just an ending that opened the door for players to walk away with different conclusions. Neither interpretation was wrong at the time, but the compilation ultimately solidified the latter as canon. With the compilation, we of course know that the second perspective is the correct one, thanks to Advent Children and Dirge of Cerberus, but that was not the case in 1997. And to me, that ambiguity is what is so interesting when thinking about the Final Fantasy VII Remake project. This links back to exactly what we discussed earlier with how Square had to break free from fate to include events and stories outside the original game. The Remake Trilogy is the first time all these elements are being incorporated into a single unified narrative. The ending of Final Fantasy VII is no longer open to interpretation. It will be fully realized within the Remake Trilogy's vision. So, that opens the question, what if the Remake Trilogy is Square's attempt to unify all perceptions into a definitive retelling? Is it that crazy to say that perhaps defying fate is defying the ambiguity of the original game, creating an ending that is clear and no longer up for interpretation? What if the key to everything in the Final Fantasy VII Remake project was never about fate at all? What if it was always about perception? We've established that the Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy is not actually rewriting the story, but rather expanding it. So, if the story remains the same, what is actually changing? The answer lies not in the events themselves, but in how those events are perceived. Fate was never about the events themselves, but the perception behind those events. In other words, the Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy isn't about changing what happens, but changing how it is experienced. Reality itself is shifting, not through new events, but through the way they are framed and understood. In the original game, Cloud's identity crisis shaped how we experienced the story. His perception was distorted, and so was ours. Final Fantasy VII essentially lies to you for the majority of the game. It's pretty fascinating in my opinion, and it's certainly a topic I'll be diving into deeper at another time. The Remake Trilogy is doing something similar, but on a much larger scale. Square Enix isn't just playing with Cloud's memories this time. They're playing with ours. The Remake Trilogy plays with perspective and perception for both the player and even the characters themselves. For Square Enix, this project wasn't about revisiting the past, it's about reshaping our understanding of this universe. But unlike in 1997, where you were left to interpret the story independently, the Remake Trilogy guides us towards a singular vision, Square Enix's ultimate version of Final Fantasy VII that unifies all perceptions into one. In doing so, the game is essentially challenging our memories of the original, forcing us to almost question what we thought we knew and what we thought we understood about the original game. Having said that, it's ironic, isn't it? A project designed to unify perception has done the exact opposite. Instead of telling the story straight on with additions from the compilation, the Remake Trilogy has sparked more debate, speculation, and uncertainty than ever before. With both entries so far, the story seemingly strays further from what we remember, introducing new elements, altered events, and mysteries that never existed in the original game. You can't help but be left questioning what's happening. What's real, what's changed, and what everything means. But here's the truth, in my opinion. This isn't a mistake. It's not bad writing, it's not an accident or an annoying way to keep fans engaged. It's by design. As I've said, the Remake Trilogy has never been about rewriting the story. The goal has been to reshape how we perceive it. Yet, because of how we remember Final Fantasy VII, these shifts feel like radical departures even when they aren't. For some, this can make the Remake Trilogy feel nothing like the original rather than an enhancement of it. Why? Because our perception of Final Fantasy VII has already been distorted by nostalgia, the passage of time, and by the many spin-offs in the compilation that have altered how we view this world. This right here is exactly what the Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy is confronting. It's meant to challenge the way we think about Final Fantasy VII. Tetsuya Nomura himself put it best in an interview with Young Jump last February, translated by the team at Shinra Archaeology. This is more to do with the overall goal of the Remake Trilogy and not just Rebirth, but one desire has been to correct and unify distortions in people's perceptions. The usual formula with a remake is to keep gameplay systems and story as is while enhancing graphics. However, more than 20 years have passed since the original game came out, and merely improving the visuals would not create something that meets modern standards. I also think players' memories of the game have been heavily skewed by nostalgia. I don't think there are many people who have been constantly replaying Final Fantasy VII for the past 2 decades, so each player's memories have slowly and steadily diverged over time. Furthermore, with Final Fantasy VII having multiple spin-off titles, certain scenes have become different from what they were in the original. Because of all the time that's passed in the existence of these spin-offs, there's been this subtle distortion of perception in players' memories. When someone replays the game, they might think, wait, this is how the scene goes, but I remember it differently. I'm conscious of this too, but particularly Nojima, who's in charge of the scenario, was concerned about this distortion of perception, so we really want to bring everything together into one. In response to this, the interviewer says to Nomura, "I've definitely sensed that distortion of perceptions with the spin-off titles, but how is this distortion depicted in the game itself?" In response, Nomura says, "There's a scene near the end of the game where Sephiroth is hurtling through this white space and Cloud goes flying along with him, and you see all sorts of visions. Among these many visions must certainly be the world of Final Fantasy VII in each player's heart, and although they're all Final Fantasy VII, each one is slightly different. You've sort of got these multiple alternate timelines existing. We've made the differences quite clear. For instance, in World A, you'll have a certain character alive, while in World B, they aren't. But basically, everyone has different interpretations of things, and their memories get gradually rewritten over time. Plus, there's the discrepancies introduced by the spin-offs. And so, in this title as well, we've allowed players to experience several different layers of the world, and the visions you see are meant to express that idea." I think this answer from Nomura is legitimately the single most telling interview he has done over the years about the Remake Trilogy. He lays it out as clear as day. Players look back on the game through clouded eyes of nostalgia, with the multiple spin-offs changing what happened in certain scenes in the original. As a result, Nomura and Nojima both feel there's a distortion of perception, and as he shared, one desire has been to correct and unify distortions in people's perceptions. Even in 2019, 5 years before this interview, Kazushige Nojima shared a statement that echoes this from Nomura entirely. The original game used cartoon-like stylized art, and the story was completed by players using their imagination to supplement portions that couldn't be depicted as a result. Even if they were seeing the same scene, the information they took away from it and how they interpreted it differed depending on the viewer. Perhaps it's what might be considered a narrative form of storytelling nowadays. In Final Fantasy VII Remake, there will be much less room for player imagination. This fact will probably change the feel of the story considerably. People who know the original might not know quite how to take it. Such is the fear that I have. But I also have conviction. It should be possible to feel a much deeper connection to Cloud as you join alongside him. It would be amazing if you could feel that fiery flame together with him. And beyond Nojima and Nomura, Kitase put it even more directly. When asked about which parts of the game were hard to create, Kitase says that time has made it so that fans' favorite scenes are beautified in their minds and thus in a way already remade by them. Thus, their greatest opponent and hurdle was such mental remakes. He says that many of the staff working on VII Remake were also players when VII was first released, and as such have great respect for the original game, and that is how they cleared this hurdle. With the current state of the story and the remake project, I think it's completely fair to question or be confused with the direction and decision behind elements like worlds, whispers, and more. Why add all these things in the first place if the story isn't changing? There's a few reasons that are essential to this project being the way it is. First, it promotes conversation. It's no secret that the 4-year wait between Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was difficult for both fans and Square Enix. You're essentially putting the narrative on hold, with Rebirth picking up right at the end of Remake like no time passed at all. Square attempted to do its best to keep fans engaged with the Final Fantasy VII series with a variety of initiatives that at least made the 4-year wait seem less than it actually was. That started with Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade in June 2021, which was an enhanced version of Remake that took advantage of PlayStation 5 hardware to offer 60 FPS support and more. Additionally, the team packed in a 2-chapter DLC in the form of Episode Intermission, which starred Yuffie Kisaragi and her whereabouts during the main story. At the end of the DLC, Intermission brought a few new cutscenes and an ending that felt like it just kept going, and we saw the party reach calm after walking away from Midgar. This was an exciting new chapter that really continued the excitement that Remake left off on, and Square wasn't done. We saw the major Final Fantasy VII 25th anniversary livestream in June 2022, where we got the reveal of Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion, Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, the second game in the Remake project. Crisis Core Reunion released on all modern platforms in December 2022, paving the way for 2023's release of Ever Crisis and kickoff for Rebirth marketing. Even though there were 4 years between Remake and Rebirth, the wait wasn't bad at all, largely due to these initiatives set in place. The nature of Remake's ending kept conversation and theories alive for the entirety of this time period, and that never would have happened if the developers simply left off with the party leaving Midgar normally. Naturally, the same can be said with Rebirth. The developers aimed to cause discussion within the community that would last with the mysterious nature of Aerith's final moments. What really is going on with Zack? Is Aerith actually saved, and can we bring her back to our world? How can Cloud see the rift? This isn't an accident or anything of the sort. This was purposeful, and both Hamaguchi and Kitase have said as much. Speaking with Eurogamer in November 2024, Hamaguchi said the following on the ending of Rebirth. "There was a danger there. There was definitely a trap," he said with regards to Aerith's fate. "With the original game, I was just a fan. I played the game when I was younger, and I've got my perspective on that scene as just a single fan. I felt if I made a decision, it has to go in this direction. We have to do it this way. That would very much make it a fan-driven thing. Maybe make it more like fan service. I kind of want to avoid doing that." Mr. Kitase often says this, Hamaguchi continued, that he really wanted to create that kind of debate and speculation after the game and moving through to the third game that people keep talking about it up until they do see the final conclusion. In that sense, I think we probably have achieved exactly what he wanted to do there, and I'm very satisfied with that because people are still talking about it. Hamaguchi acknowledged a mixed reaction to the game's ending, but admitted that's kind of the way we wanted it to go to ensure discussion continued until the third game in the trilogy. "The important thing is that the player will wonder whether it's going to change or not," he said. "So if it was exactly as it was in the original storyline, you'd know exactly what was coming. There'd be no anticipation, there'd be no excitement. For people who played the game, they'd know exactly what's coming next. It wouldn't really be a fun experience. It might be nostalgic, but it wouldn't be a fun experience. The real purpose of these elements is to indicate to the player this is where the story might change," he said. "It doesn't mean it will change, this is where it could change. You might see something new, you might see something different, and that really does help people to keep engaged with the story and keep having that wonder and that anticipation about what's coming next." I think that kind of divided opinion is something we were always going to get just because Final Fantasy VII, the original game, was such a popular game. It's such a well-known game that if we'd have completely left it as it was, not change anything, people wouldn't like that. And if we changed it completely, there'd be another set of people who wouldn't like that at all. So we really have to try and find a balance, I think, to try and satisfy as many people as possible. I really do want to continue with that level of fans looking at us and asking, so how's it going to change? What's the ultimate conclusion of this story going to be? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to change? And to keep that level of excitement and anticipation up for the third game in the series, I think that's the job that we've set for ourselves. Hamaguchi essentially expressed that this speculation and discussion that has been created was purposeful. If the Remake Trilogy was just a one-to-one remake, there would be no excitement or desire to play the game if you were someone who experienced the original, since you would know everything that happens. And this melts perfectly with Nomura's desire to keep fans of the original engaged. In an interview with The Guardian in 2023, Nomura said the following on his reasoning for approaching the remake the way the team did. "There were a number of successful remade games out there, And looking at them and how they turned out, I realized that if we just made it a better looking version of the original game, it probably wouldn't have become the scale of project that it is, and it probably wouldn't have worked out. To get people interested and give players the motivation to play through it again, we needed to change Final Fantasy VII and add in new elements to make Remake what it should be, rather than just sticking to the original. That's a very interesting quote from Nomura, making Remake what it should be. With so many years between the original game and the development for the Remake Trilogy, the thought of what a remake could be of course weighed heavy on Nomura's mind. He said as much. In that same interview with The Guardian, Nomura shared that he thought a lot about a remake after Advent Children released, even before we announced the remake project. Before we even started officially thinking about it, there were a lot of people calling for a Final Fantasy VII Remake, so I had been thinking, well, if we were going to do it, how would I approach a remake? What would that even look like? Beyond discussion and a refreshed experience for players and fans of the original, there's another key reason for the narrative choices we've seen, amplifying and delivering upon the ultimate vision of Final Fantasy VII. Fans see concepts like whispers or worlds and immediately assume the narrative has jumped into full multiverse theory, when in reality, these elements are just new ways of presenting existing ideas, not fundamentally altering the story. Even the most out there additions and changes in the game have a deep-rooted purpose that uses elements of the original and the themes surrounding it. Let's take Aerith's fate and pretty much the entirety of Chapter 14 in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. If you want a 30-minute analysis of what exactly happens to Aerith, I highly encourage you to watch my earlier episode of Under the Plate surrounding this exact topic. I personally walk through each aspect of these scenes, including how the decision to omit her death from Rebirth will elevate Part 3 to heights never reached in the original game. But, to recap, at the end of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Aerith is dead. Cloud has created a false reality that Aerith is alive and well through his perception of stopping Sephiroth's blade. Obviously, this is Cloud's desired reality or dream. Why make this drastic change from the original? It's all to drive home the themes and messaging behind Cloud's broken mind. In an interview with Anime News Network, Yoshinori Kitase shared a comment about the loss of Aerith in the original game and how the team approached it for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. When discussing the scenario with Nomura and Nojima, we were also talking about how in the original it's showing Cloud's perspective, his feeling of immense loss, of losing someone that you love and having this hole in your heart. When considering how to depict this in the remake series, we also thought about not only expressing this loss of someone who means so much to you, but also this sense of a person experiencing loss, being unable to force yourself to forget this person and almost like an inability to accept it, struggling with the possibility of losing someone. So that was something we wanted to show in Rebirth. Cloud's inability to accept loss plays a key factor in the future of the story. And it's this desire that ultimately leads to the events of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Loss, or death, is one of the biggest themes of the original Final Fantasy VII alongside life, and this change, while it might seem like a departure from the original, is really an elevation of it. The payoff will just be in Part 3. And truthfully, this change further aligns the Remake Trilogy with Advent Children, where Nomura and the other creatives aim to showcase how consciousness can live on, even after death. In the making of Advent Children special, Tetsuya Nomura lays out this concept perfectly.
AC ではどっちかというとその記憶とかそういったようなものよりは意識として生き続けているという描き方に変わったかなと。その前作のラストを踏まえて、今回はそこを広げていってるというか、死んでもその意識というものがまだいつまでも 残っている。クラウドが、AC の本編中に何度かエアリスの姿を見てるんですけど、その意識を、死んだ人の命を感じているから見えているというか、そこにその意識があるというよりは、その生きている人の中にその意識があるからそこに見えているというか。
This right here is exactly what's happening in Rebirth, just with a different lens. And hey, that white space looks familiar, huh? Aerith's fate ultimately is closely intertwined with the concept of worlds, which many to this day still interpret as timelines. Like Aerith's fate, we have also made a massive video detailing each and every bit of this concept, so I highly encourage you to watch that video to see for yourself. However, to basically recap in case you missed that episode, the livestream holds not only the thoughts and memories of all living beings, past, present, and future, but also their hopes and dreams. This spiritual energy is living and not only contains these memories of those dead, but also those unrequited desires and dreams they brought with them. The livestream has its own will, a will that is colored by the life that returns to it. Everything is part of this cumulative whole, and these worlds comprised of wills, dreams, and memories are simply pieces of it. These worlds are facets of the livestream created by the desires and dreams of people within it. They are not multiversal worlds or alternate timelines that will greatly diverge from the original. Each world is depicted with a different stamp, which is solely used for us, the player, to differentiate between each of them. The story is not splitting into new realities, but rather revealing the layers of reality that have always existed. To truly understand the reasoning and belief behind this, we must look at Kazushige Nojima's key inspirations for this project, Yogacara and Jungian psychology. The themes of these two topics revolve around human perception and the greater collective of humanity. These themes did exist in Final Fantasy VII, but like Loss, have been further elevated with the remake project. To briefly touch on Yogacara, this is a school of Buddhist thought mostly revolving around perception and consciousness. Sounds pretty similar to what Nomura mentioned in that interview about unifying perception, huh? This shift in perception is seen throughout each and every aspect of both Remake and Rebirth. The way Cloud sees the world, the way Sephiroth manipulates reality, the way the livestream functions, it's all tied to a concept that has fascinated storytellers for centuries, the nature of perception itself. This is where Nojima's influences become clear. From the very beginning, Final Fantasy VII has been shaped by Buddhist and psychological concepts. In particular, Yogacara Buddhism and Jungian psychology provide a lens through which we can understand why the Remake Trilogy embraces multiple perspectives instead of one singular truth. In Yogacara, there are 8 perceptions, with the first 5 being familiar to most: touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. Yogacara 6th perception is of the mind, meaning how we put the other 5 senses together to form an understanding. The 7th sense is of feelings or the self. It's whether we like or dislike something. It's our persona, our feelings, and our desires. And finally, the 8th sense essentially acts as an all-encompassing consciousness, one that can be cultivated to reach nirvana. It's basically an extension of the 7th sense of the self almost, broadened to incorporate your own perception into all perception. Only when the fetters of karma are abandoned can one ascend beyond the cycles of rebirth. What's important to remember here is that Yogacara involves perception and our individual relationships with that. What we perceive is a reality all of its own in a way. In dreams and meditation, we still perceive things as an outside force. We can feel, see, and hear things that we are not interacting with outside of our mindscape. Dreams specifically connect to this concept. You can still use your senses within a dream. It's almost like an alternate reality, depending on how you look at it. Within a dream, you can still see, hear, and feel things, even think. Concepts in Jungian psychology connect to this with its ideals about collective unconsciousness. Dreams can be symbolically broken down, and these symbols can represent different aspects of the psyche and even common elements found throughout humanity. Does that sound like a live stream to anyone else, or is it just me? Again, for a more deep dive into this philosophy, be sure to check out episode 3 of Under the Plate, Breaking Through Reality, Understanding Worlds in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. If the concepts of Yogacara and Jungian psychology are a little too confusing at first, there is an incredibly detailed description of what worlds truly are in a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth conversation you might have missed at Cosmo Canyon.
Indeed it is. Thank you for sharing.
The blessings of the planet be upon you.
Now, would anyone else like to share their story with the group?
So, my parents are no longer with us. Here, that is. But I believe they're still out there, on another plane. I've been reading a bunch of theories about this alternate world in the hope of going there someday. And over the course of my studies, I stumbled across a fascinating theory. It addressed the issue of what the life stream is, arguing that spiritual energy is actually a manifestation of our knowledge and memories. Like I said, it's a fascinating theory, but it's incomplete. What about our hopes and dreams? We remember those, don't we? So what if spiritual energy doesn't distinguish between our real, lived memories and the unrealized desires buried deep in our hearts? What if coming into contact with that energy allowed us to peer through the looking glass, so to speak? It's just an idea, but I hope to find the truth someday.
Well, isn't that splendid?
Blessings of the planet be upon you.
And may the bounty of the planet's knowledge be with you forevermore.
To me, it's really interesting how everything slowly fits into the framework of the compilation in the original game when you sit back and think about these elements that seem out of place. Look at the Whispers, who are clearly likely the Cetra, destined to preserve fate, now split and either corrupted by Sephiroth, acting as a visual of negative lifestream, or powered by Aerith through Holy. Essentially a visual representation of Lifestream Black and Lifestream White from On a Way to a Smile, the Cetra are set in a visual clash between light and dark. These same chapters also go hand in hand with the concepts behind worlds. I could go on and on with more and more definitive examples, but for the sake of continuing our examination of other elements, we'll move on for now. And finally, this direction is for the developers themselves. Everyone has their own version of Final Fantasy VII in a way. We saw this earlier with a quote from Nomura and even the different interpretations of the original game's ending from Kitase and Nojima. Just as every player has their own version of Final Fantasy VII in their hearts, so too do the people who created the game. The Remake Trilogy is their chance to once and for all wrap everything together in a way that only these creatives could. This kind of project was never possible on PlayStation 1. Square would have never managed to incorporate lore from multiple spin-offs, sequels, and other pieces of media into one ultimate telling of the game at that time. For one, it didn't exist yet, but really, the current technology has allowed for this and so much more, delivering on areas like combat, graphics, and voice acting that were not possible on PS1. For the development team, this trilogy is about making Final Fantasy VII what it should be and what it can be. Not only are these story additions and expansions for fans, but they are also for the developers too. Decades after the original release, breathing new life into the game that changed everything for Square has to be more exciting than a standard remake. Nomura, Kitase, and others have already alluded to this. The Final Fantasy VII Remake project is a love letter to the entire medium of video games. It almost feels impossible. I look at the careers of Tetsuya Nomura, Yoshinori Kitase, Motomu Toriyama, and Kazushige Nojima, and I can't help but think about what this project means to each of them. Retirement is closing in with each passing year. Nomura has already begun thinking about this, even sharing that it has weighed on his mind as recently as last summer. These creators we love so dearly won't be making games forever. We likely have but a decade or so left. And when you look at the Final Fantasy VII Remake project through this lens, it's hard not to see the mark that these creatives are leaving behind forever. By the time Part 3 releases, Final Fantasy VII will be at least 30 years old. This trilogy will stand as the ultimate culmination of everything this game has ever been, whether on the PlayStation 1 or on the big screen. Not only does it recreate and reimagine Final Fantasy VII in ways never thought possible, but it carries with it all the games and lessons these creators have been a part of over the last 3 decades. It is not just a remake. It is not just an expansion of the original game. It is their life's work. So, here we are, on the brink of the final chapter in what has assuredly become one of the most ambitious projects ever conceived in any medium. Final Fantasy VII Remake began as a far-out, impossible dream, something that fans requested endlessly for almost 2 decades. With the project realized now through 2 of its 3 planned entries, we've seen Square Enix craft a full realization of what Final Fantasy VII was always meant to be. If the story is going to follow roughly the same path as the original, how is Part 3 going to play out? To understand where we're headed, we must return to the beginning. Final Fantasy VII Remake was a pitch for this project. Square Enix flat out said, "This is going to be different from the way you might have expected it to be." And as a result, every single piece of the compilation is present now, something that was never possible in 1997, simply because it didn't exist. We are not just replaying Final Fantasy VII, we are seeing it through a lens that ties together 30 years of history into one grand narrative. Just as Hideaki Anno reimagined Evangelion with the rebuild of Evangelion, Square Enix is doing the same with what is essentially a rebuild of Final Fantasy VII. What is fact and what is fiction? This question posed in the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth reveal trailer is not just a tagline. It serves as the core of the Remake Trilogy's approach to storytelling. What do we actually know? What do we just think we know? The deeper we go, the more you can realize that reality itself is shaped by perception. The goal has never been to rewrite history, only to maintain mystery for players new and old. And as we approach the final entry, one question looms above all. How will it end? For all the questions surrounding the Remake Trilogy, the answer has always been in plain sight. The story of Final Fantasy VII is not being rewritten. It is simply being expanded with the compilation. This is evident through the countless interviews we've discussed today. Every time Yoshinori Kitase or Tetsuya Nomura discuss this project, the developers always insist it is following the structure of the original. They are not making a new story. They are making the ultimate Final Fantasy VII story, taking into account everything that ever was and is Final Fantasy VII. This is the key reason we've seen departures from the original, not because the story is changing, but because the compilation and all elements and themes from it are being implemented. In 2022, Kitase shared a comment that really sums up why the project is the way it is. The focal point of the story hasn't changed. As for the new mysteries that differ from the original Final Fantasy VII, players of the original will be able to enjoy the game in a new way. The challenge we tackled for this project was how to include those new mysteries without deviating from the original. Regarding game progression, there will be some changes. If while you're playing you think, was this cut? It's because the structure of the story has changed a bit due to the nature of it being a trilogy. Although the order in which you visit some places may change, our policy is essentially not to cut anything. As he shared, nothing is being removed. We're still going to go to Bone Village, Rocket Town, and all these places that normally would have been in Rebirth but were skipped. Some may have been pushed into Part 3, but they have not been erased. With the story spread across 3 40-plus hour experiences, it's only natural that some changes were made here and there to the structure. The development team had to create plenty of new scenarios that weren't even a thought in 1997, like the fact that Yuffie and Vincent were optional members of the party. Obviously, this isn't the case anymore, which required Yuffie's introduction and implementation to be crafted from scratch. Despite these events, which some will view as major departures, everything feels right at home and in line with the story and thematic elements of Final Fantasy VII. The development team is essentially adding their final touches and tweaks almost 3 decades later. So, in regards to the ending, Nomura has gone on record stating that the end of the remake trilogy will connect with Advent Children. Speaking with The Guardian, Nomura said the following: "If you play right through to the end, it will link up to Advent Children, so you don't need to worry about that," he says with a knowing smile. Kitase has too commented on the link to Advent Children, speaking with Games Radar in 2023. "We are finally going to link up with Advent Children. That is going to be part of canon," Kitase confirms. The overall storyline, the developments, will not go wildly out in a way that will not add up to Advent Children in the end. I don't think anyone wanted that. That's not what we're looking to create here. But to make sure it doesn't become stale and people know exactly where it's going, that it doesn't just follow the original word for word, we add in extra elements which add that little bit of doubt. Getting the right balance of that is so key. Ultimately, we're not trying to change the Final Fantasy VII story into something really different. The overall balance wouldn't really allow for that anyway. If Part 3 is going to be such a vast departure from the original game's story, why would Nomura and Kitase even comment on something like this? Why would they continue to reaffirm that everything leads to the same point, that there won't be crazy story changes? Advent Children relies on the events of the original game, including the death of Aerith, the defeat of Sephiroth, and the casting of Holy to tell its story. It's a beautiful examination of dealing with loss and trauma and coming to terms with the fact that you must accept said loss to be able to move forward. You can't just let it go and live like it never happened. With these themes present more than ever, and especially Rebirth, it's yet another reminder that the story is not changing into something different. It's a retelling that incorporates everything from the compilation and beyond. Nomura has even referred to Remake as the 5th entry in the compilation multiple times. At this point in the trilogy, we've already seen the events of Disc 1 recreated very faithfully, with a few changes here and there. These changes are definitely drastic in some instances, like with Aerith's fate, but some, like the Midgardsormr battle, are just slight tweaks. It's certainly possible that Part 3 could just veer right off the road and tell something we never expected, but ask yourself, is this really something Square Enix will do after following the original so closely for 2/3 of the trilogy? What evidence is there to show that this thing is going to end differently? Even in the climactic final chapter of Final Fantasy VII Remake, where we see a future we wish to change, one of the events showcased has already come to pass. Aerith still died at the Forgotten Capital. Cloud is just suppressing his memory of it, whether through his will alone or with the assistance of Jenova. This right here is key. Everything that revolves around worlds, collective consciousness, and the lifestream has been exemplified to propel one person, Cloud Strife. This game is about him, and his broken mind has always been what Final Fantasy VII has centered around. By leaving him living in denial of Aerith's death, we're going to have a much more emotional payoff in Part 3 where he realizes his life is a lie. Tetsuya Nomura, Yoshinori Kitase, Kazushige Nojima, Naoki Hamaguchi, and the rest of the development team want to make this the ultimate and definitive way to experience Final Fantasy VII. You cannot do that without the compilation, and a traditional remake, as described by the development team, would not have been able to accomplish this. Could we see the Black Whispers corrupted by Sephiroth fuel Meteor, and the White Whispers powered by Aerith through Holy fight back against it and power the lifestream? Will the theme of perception play a pivotal role in the way the final chapter unfolds? It's anyone's guess, but here's what I can say with absolute certainty. Aerith isn't magically going to return from the dead, eliminating the entire thematic messaging behind the game. Sephiroth isn't going to be redeemed, becoming a hero in the end. Cloud is still going to find himself in the livestream with Tifa as he battles to reconstruct his broken mind. Because at its core, Final Fantasy VII is about coming to terms with loss and accepting it, not undoing it. As of just last month, Yoshinori Kitase once again commented on Part 3 and where the scenario is headed. Speaking with Famitsu, he shared the following. As the next part is the conclusion, I gave Nomura the homework that I want something that would respect the original while also giving a sense of satisfaction beyond what could be experienced in the original. Something that would conclude the remake project. That was finally handed in at the end of the year, and the scenario for the third installment was then completed. I am very satisfied with it, so I'm sure it will be a satisfying conclusion for fans as well. To me, this quote only reaffirms everything we've discussed today, an ending that gives a sense of satisfaction beyond what could be experienced in the original. That sure sounds like something that removes the ambiguity of the ending. With the compilation in hand, the story will at last be whole in Part 3. I won't sit here and tell you the events of the ending will play out exactly the same as the original game, but I'd be willing to bet we'll see a familiar sight as the livestream swirls around the world one last time to save it. And this time, maybe we'll see something more beyond one last look at Aerith. Maybe the party is seen rebuilding after the world is saved. Who knows? I do think it is very interesting though just how familiar so many scenes from the original ending look to Rebirth and Remake. At the end of the day, if this is where we are headed, there are bound to be fans who will be immensely disappointed with this direction when credits roll on Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. Many saw the concept of defying fate as a diversion of the entire game's story or even a sequel, but I don't think that was ever the case. The Final Fantasy VII Remake project is all about bringing together each and every piece of the compilation and unifying perception after 28 years once and for all. This is not my opinion. This is not speculation. This is exactly what has been said in interviews for over 7 years now. The Final Fantasy VII Remake project is not a sequel. It is the same story we have always known, now presented with an entire compilation of titles and 30 years of passion. That is what makes this project so incredible. I have personally adored both Final Fantasy VII Remake and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I cannot wait to see how the story is concluded in Part 3. Maybe I'll end up being right on the money with this, and maybe I'm completely off. But I'm cool with either, because what makes this project so special is not knowing what comes next. Even I, someone who spent thousands of hours across the Final Fantasy VII compilation, can't definitively say where this thing is headed. So I encourage you, cherish the discussion, the speculation, and the love we all share for this world. Even if you completely disagree with it, promote fun and positive discussion. Personally, I think there's so many instances of the Final Fantasy VII community trying to overcomplicate everything they can, but that's just my opinion, and at the end of the day, if I disagree with it, it's fun to discuss. Because you have to remember, the final game in the Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy will be here before you know it, and this celebration that's lasted almost a decade at this point will be all but a memory. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Under the Plate. Please let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on the direction of Part 3. Do you agree with me and think we're headed towards the same story, or do you think I'm crazy and we're getting something else entirely? I'm looking forward to seeing what you all have to say in the comments, and I'll be sure to reply to as many as I can. Once again, if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and sharing it with a friend. We rely on you to continue making these videos, and we're grateful for your support. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.